Hi there, and welcome to the BIMvoice podcast. My name is Petru and I'm glad to have you here. I'm a civil engineer living and working in Norway since 2014, and I'm passionate about building information modeling. I truly believe change is necessary and inevitable in our industry. To implement faster, better, and less costly ways of working, digital transformation is vital, and everyone involved must stop just talking about implementing BIM and actually do it. And what way to do it better than just to learn from the ones who have done it in the past or are doing it right now? Hello to the BIMvoice podcast. I'm glad to have you here, Lucian. How are you doing today?
Hello, Petru. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great.
Awesome. Glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Who are you and what are you doing?
So I'm currently a research assistant at the Technical University of Berlin, where I'm teaching and doing research. So a little bit of a background. I actually started at the TU Berlin in 2016 when we started a brand new department with the purpose of filling some gaps in the field of the civil engineering field, especially. So one of the main gaps we see is, let's say, the integration. We see like a great efforts on trying to have, let's say, a more digital approach when working on the projects. But one thing which is actually missing is the integration. So the name of the department, Civil Systems Engineering, it's mainly, let's say, come from the concept of systems engineering, which is heavily, let's say, adapted and implemented in our aerospace industry and also in the automotive industry as well, where they have a kind of an integrated way of working. And then besides that, I'm also technical lead at a small company called Contact here in Berlin, where we basically doing consultancy and software development. Me and my partner, which is the professor I'm working at the university, we have good background knowledge when it comes to civil engineering field. And especially when it comes to these digital solutions for the civil engineering field, we see there are a lot of gaps. One of them is for training people, and the other one is for custom tailored solutions to support the entire efforts in the civil engineering field. So we have the consultancy, and most of the time we do trainings for different companies. And we have the software development where we actually have clients, they want to have their custom tailored solutions to actually support their internal process or the process they have with their clients and all the stakeholders actually they have contact.
I see. Can you give any examples of these softwares you built?
Well, I think one of let's say hotspots where we see there is a lack of solutions and we see a lot of room for customization is actually for asset management. So usually imagine that you have a housing corporation and they need to do their asset management. So how do they do it? They currently have some processes in place they follow. And usually if you look at the market and trying to see what kind of tools you have available to support this process of doing the asset management for their built asset, right, or how it's called. So there are no tools. There are no tools which are easily customizable. I have the knowledge that a lot of asset management companies and asset owners they started doing, let's say, in a more digital way, the asset management using Revit, for example. But Revit is not meant to be an asset management tool. It's mainly for the design authoring, and it's supporting to some extent very well this, let's say, the design authority phase. But it's not a tool someone should use for the asset management because there are different requirements for that. So we have some platforms. Mainly we focus on the web base because we think that slowly we have to move away from the desktop solutions because there is a lot of hassle, and also is one of the let's say is the main source of issues when it comes to information silos. Usually people what they are doing with using this desktop-based applications, right? You have some tools installed on your computer, and it's pretty easy to save everything you do, all your work, to save it on your local computer. And you basically, what you share with the other members of your team is just some reports, and a lot of data is lost. So we try to, with all the solutions, especially with our clients, we try to convince them that the cloud-based solution is much more better than a desktop one. And then we focus on developing these cloud-based solutions to support different workflows.
Yes, I really think about this. It's a huge communication problem. When everybody works locally, a lot of information is missing. It's getting lost. Just bits.
I mean, they have it. They have it, they work with it, but then the only thing they save somehow is only the deliverables. And then everything on which the deliverables were created, it's lost.
Yeah, exactly. And this is also very difficult to reuse it on other projects. And especially like, let's say maybe on some projects they have some good solution and they try to apply that. But actually, I think something that is even more important, a lot of the mistakes, the biggest mistakes, are forgotten. And that's something really, really big, because the mistakes should be really important, a really important focus to learn from and to grow from, right?
Yeah, that's true. But it's like, to some extent, that's something which is actually related to what kind of knowledge network you have inside your company and how you decide to share this kind of mistakes, right? I think this is a little bit more of related to the process of organizing your team in such a way that they have, I don't know if it's you have to create some kind of incentive for the teams to share this, or it's just built in your company culture, this idea of sharing not only the mistakes but also the successes, right? So we can learn from both of them. And then, of course, we know that a lot of success stories are built on a lot of trial and error, and probably a lot of mistakes, which kind of represent the foundation of the success story, right? But I know companies where they have this, how do you call it? It's a lunch-based sharing session, something like that. During the lunch, people, they just grab their lunch and then they come together, and someone is actually, while they are eating, someone is actually presenting what they managed to do and how they do it. So I think this is a good way to actually share, especially, let's say, at the local level, because we are talking about first making sure that the team you have in a local office is aware of what's happening on the other projects. And then when you talk about a bigger company, then you have to make sure that somehow you share all these learnings across the company.
Yes, that's true. I would go even further with this, with what you just said about building a culture inside the company. It might sound a little bit crazy, but I think this is what our industry needs. It's actually to not build a company culture, but an entire industry culture. Because you mentioned a little bit earlier about the silos. This is actually something that plagues our industry. We are way, way too fragmented. We don't work together. We just don't do it. The actors involved in the entire process, if they work well at some level, at individual level, the cooperation level, it's really bad.
Well, I can tell you why is that, because they are used to work on an input-output way. So they are receiving input from someone and then providing output to someone else, right? And then where everything breaks is because they don't collaborate in the early phases in the project. Because imagine, like, the workflow, which was like really ingrained in the civil engineering field, is like you have the architect proposing a solution and being always in contact with the client, right? And then once you have the architectural solution, or a kind of a, let's say, 50% solution, architectural solution, then you provide the input to the structural engineer. And then the structural engineer is doing his job, and then probably might come back to the architect with some some feedback, some proposals to change some things in order to make it, I don't know, one of, let's say, key performance indicator in our industry is cost and time. And it always comes down to how quick and how cheap you can build something. All right. So these are the main key performance indicators. Let's say kind of are within our industry. So now there's one thing we have to change, because we also have the possibility to use the computers in a more meaningful way to support the entire design process. As we can allow people to come together and explore various solutions together. So we do this, we try to teach people, or the students, our students at the university, we have, especially when it comes to the social collaboration, let's say social communication on the project, as how people should organize their work in terms of knowing when to talk to someone, when to ask some information, in understanding which are the interface points between different disciplines or with another stakeholders. So we have a class designed in this way, where students come together and the focus is on the collaboration. So it's a project-based class. They focus on collaboration and mainly try to organize their way from this perspective of strengthening the collaboration on the project. And then, of course, one of the key or the essential parts of this is knowing in advance where are the interface points between different, let's say, specialties which are actually working together on the project.
That sounds good. How do the students receive this? How do they see this class?
They really like it. I mean, it's like just half an hour ago, I just got an email from one student saying they really like this way of teaching. But I have to mention that we kind of have a flipped class approach in our teaching. So we are kind of the facilitators, and then we kind of facilitate their learning, but we don't give them like targeted. We allow them to, based on their preferences, for example, to decide on which direction they want to go deeper. I think you're familiar with this T shape, where you have like in the surface, like the horizontal part of the T, you have, let's say, the basic knowledge you need to know, and then you have the possibility to go on the vertical line more in depth to actually, let's say, explore a bit more or learn a little bit more. And one of the advantages of this approach is that we should never forget that in our field, we always continuously need to learn, even on the working on a daily job. And then one of the advantages is that you actually teach the student how to learn, not give him theory and then say, okay, you learn now.
You know, it took me over 10 years after I finished the university to learn this on my own skin. And now I became an avid learner. This is like ironic, because when I finished the university, I just thought, yeah, it's going to stop there. I finished, now I'm going to work. Just work, make money, live my life. But it's so much more than that. The learning itself can be the purpose of our lives.
Yeah, and then you need to keep in mind that it's so much a university can actually teach you, right? Imagine it's only 4 years or 5 years back in our time. It was 5 years, right? So how much can you learn in 5 years? I mean, you can even spend the whole 24 hours in a day you have in those years, and still you'll not be able to learn everything what's related to the field. So I think one of the main purposes of the universities is actually to teach the students how to learn once they are out there in the field, and then they will always face new situations. Right? We always talk about the specificity of each project, although there are some overlaps between these projects, but there's always something which is specific, and we know that there are a lot of sources, and we can talk about this a lot.
Yeah. You know, this is funny actually. You know why I started this podcast? It's going to sound a little bit egoistical maybe, but I started, first reason is to learn more. I'm just so motivated to learn more, and at the same time to share with others, with other people that are interested in doing the same, that want to learn more and do more for our industry to fill the gaps, to help solve the problems, the struggles.
Yeah, for me, it doesn't sound so selfish. I mean, okay, you want to learn for yourself, but you also said that you want to share this with other people. So that's actually important. I mean, I'm learning every day, but in the moment when I'm sharing something with other people, I'm learning even more.
Yes.
Right? And then I think it's the same with you, and it's the same with a lot of people. And it's interesting that you decided to approach the learning process from this perspective. Not a lot of people want to go on down this road.
Yeah, it's quite unique maybe, but this will enable me to get in contact with the best of the best, because I know you're there, I'm coming for you to show the world how the things must be done.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, if we go back a little bit, you mentioned in the start that through your company or university, maybe as well, you're offering these courses or consulting services. Can you go a little
Yeah.
bit deeper in that?
Yeah, sure. So a little bit more about my background. Before I finished my studies, I actually started working with Arcadis, a big design consultancy company, and I got the chance to actually work across Europe, even outside Europe on different projects, and Belgium, France, Netherlands, Doha. This was like the places where I was like in person there, working face to face with the people, and then also collaborating remotely the way we are actually doing given the situation, trying to remotely collaborate with people from different countries, from the other side of the world, from Hong Kong to US, Philippines, and UK. A lot of I got in contact with a lot of people, and of course, once you get in contact with a lot of people, you learn more. So with Arcadis, I was actually involved. I was a BIM manager, and I was also involved in setting up back in 2013 when kind of BIM was young in Europe. So Arcadis decided to go ahead and start building a kind of a corporate strategy when it comes to the adoption of BIM. And then all the stuff which comes with the adoption of BIM, different standards, maybe setting up different processes, trying to train people, because once you think about working in a kind of a collaborative way, then you need to train people on using different software or new softwares, or make their life easier for them, right? Because we all know that back in 2013, I think AutoCAD was the king. Everything was in 2D, and of course, it was, even compared to previously how people were working, it was something beneficial from jumping from the paper-based drawing when you're doing everything by hand. Something I also experimented in the university. Jumping on doing stuff or having the computer to support your design and engineering process, and then trying to make the computer even help you a little bit more. So coming back to you, there are some consultancy services built around this, or trying to, let's say, use the knowledge I gained during these years with Arcadis, being immersed in this BIM world, and trying to help other companies which are struggling on doing this kind of jump or making this step, right? So that would be one direction. And another one, it's a little bit more, let's say, hot, let's say, when it comes to the industry and the idea of digitizing the civil engineering field. It's ready to data analytics, where we see that all the companies, all the people working on different projects, they are collecting huge amounts of data. And then this can take different forms. It can take the forms of a 3D model, it can take the forms of the reports, can take the forms of different measurements on the site. If you think about doing the geotechnical measurements for the soil, doing the inspections of the existing system, a product, I don't know, maybe for a bridge, maybe for a tunnel, maybe for a building. So we have different ways, and then we see that people are start adopting these new ways of collecting more and more data. And the whole idea is, okay, we have a whole theory on which our field is, or the civil engineering domain is built, and we are using it in our daily practice, but we all know that there are a lot of unknowns. So how can you use the data to fill those gaps? There is an opportunity to create new services. There are opportunities to automate some of the aspects which are related to design, asset management, and so forth. And I think all these, let's say, efforts have a single base, a big foundation, which is data.
If we can recap this quickly to be sure that we understand. You said that you help other companies to build their BIM strategy or something similar.
Yeah. My interest area is automation, design automation, everything what is related to design automation. And of course, with this comes also changing specific processes, how we design things and so forth. But there is also the focus on this collaboration and communication, which is mainly, let's say, under the umbrella of my professor interests, and then using the technologies to support this. Yeah, I hope it makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there are different ways of how to help companies. But one of the main things is, like, we all talk about the digital transformation, or at least the entire field, civil engineering field, started to talk about the digital transformation. And then, of course, without digital solutions, we cannot talk about digital transformation. And then with the digital transformation comes also the challenge of how do we change the way we are doing things.
I see.
So that's very important.
Yeah. Well, since we're here at a podcast about BIM, what do you understand with BIM? What is BIM for you? How would you describe BIM?
Well, there's a tough question. Some people might agree or might not agree.
Do your best.
For me, the entire idea behind BIM is actually that it's going to help you to have a structured approach on dealing with the information you have on the project. We all know, how this actually started. In the beginning, there was a big hype when people were thinking that BIM is 3D. And then everything what's in 3D, it's reliable. We almost forgot that in the end, the entire 3D was just a model created for a specific purpose. So actually, when you look at what's happening or what's behind BIM nowadays, and all these standards which are put in place to some extent, or helping you to understand what kind of a workflow you need to have on the project, it's always targeted on the idea of creating something with a specific purpose, and then everything you put in a 3D model needs to serve a specific purpose. Right. So here comes the idea of the BIM uses. So for me, it's to put it in a nutshell, BIM. It's I will see it as a process, because a lot of people are saying that it's a process, but it's a set of means on actually structuring your efforts on dealing with the information on the project. And I will put this, let's say, I'll put it this way. It mainly because we have to see past of the advantage of BIM offers for the design and engineering phase. And also there are benefits for the asset managers, for the other phases in the life cycle of a system, of a product. You have the operation, you have to deal with the maintenance. If you have all the information there, or the information you need there, you no longer have to send people on the field to make measurements. If you have the information up to date, so that's one of the things, right? So you want to keep these models up to date. Otherwise, they become obsolete. So then again, even if you have an old model, you still have to send people on the field to make measurements or do inspections, right? So here it comes with a new ways of doing things and changing the way we are doing things in our field.
Yeah, that's so true. That's a really, really well articulated definition. I could not have said it better. Actually, this what you started saying about the 3D component. This is another reason I started this podcast. Actually, I wish and I hope to clarify and help people understand that BIM is not only 3D model. It's mind-boggling how widespread this idea is. So much people are limiting the purposes and the meaning of BIM to the 3D model and missing the biggest and most important component here, and the I in BIM, which is information. It's everything is about that. So
yeah, if you think in this direction, everything what's visualized as a 3D model, it's only partial information related to the entire, let's say, data you have available from a project. Imagine that you only represent the elements which are in a 3D, but linked to those 3D elements, there are a lot more information and data which is linked, and you can't always represent everything in 3D. It's just partial. If you only rely on what the 3D model is showing you, you can be misled.
Yeah, that's so true. And the other thing that it's very biased, like consultants are years ahead of the other parts involved in the process, in the planning, design, building, and owning and maintaining using the project, right? So that's why it's very important, and that's why we need to break out these silos and you work as a team, like from all the parts, all involved parts, to do that.
Yeah, that's very important. And then you come to the need of having the right tools to support this collaboration.
Yes, about that, do you think that these are the biggest challenges? We don't have the tools yet to make more fluid workflow or cooperation between these parts?
There are some challenges related to the tools. Of course, we have expected that up till now, when we're already talking about the digital transformation, some of these challenges will have been addressed. And one of the biggest challenges is this interoperability between different tools, because you have to think in this way. You might have a big team of people working on the project, and then you can just split them in a different ways. You can just create small groups with the various disciplines, right? You can create big groups which each discipline it's part of a group, right, and so forth. So you can organize it in a different way, but to some extent you still need to start sharing information between all the people working on the project. And then I think one of the biggest issue is this lack of integration. And then we think about the integration also because we talk about the interfaces between different disciplines. Let's talk about the interfaces between different tools. So how do we actually share information which is needed between different tools, right? And then, in my perspective, sometimes I was loving IFC, but I think the IFC, the way it's created, is actually misleading. It was started like a kind of an interoperability format. Yeah, I'm going to start the war now. But IFC is not the right way when we talk about this interoperability between tools. You just need to have these interfaces where you just send the data you need to a different tool. Instead of actually spending time exporting. Imagine, it's like, I can give you some example from my previous experience. For a 200 megabytes Revit file, when you export it, you're going to end up 8 times the initial size in Revit. And then I ask people from Building Smart, is like, why is that happening? It's like, okay, there are a lot of concepts which are kind of in that IFC format, and then yeah, we don't know if we need them all or people are need them all, but it's again, it's like the one-click export of your file to an IFC format. It's actually cutting off or thinking or making us think that we are cutting off this need for communication and meaningfully defining what is the need of sharing that specific model with someone else. And maybe they don't even need the entire 3D model. They only need some other kind of information from there, some general information. But you just send them a 3D model, and then they come back to you with a lot of questions asking, oh, why is that? Why is that? Maybe most of those questions are not so meaningful, but there is like, imagine you have a 3D model, and then you just sometimes out of curiosity, you start asking questions.
Are there any other potential formats that could be better than IFC?
I don't think there should be a format on exchanging this information. I mean, we all know that under the hood of all of our tools are some data models. And I'm talking about the data model, something similar to IFC, right? Imagine that you think as an IFC as a lot of lines of information or a lot of lines of text on which you have specific information related to that. It's the same happens with how the file is stored by Revit, how the file is stored by other tools like Archicad or Tekla, right? They all these tools have an underlying data model, and what you are doing actually, you transform that data model to IFC, and then from IFC you import it and transform it in Revit, for example. If you transform the model from Tekla to Revit, you have to go through this middleman called IFC. And I don't see the need of having that. It's just a way of defining well interfaces for most of the tools.
Yes.
Is defining is like, once you have these interfaces, you just you can say, okay, I'm going to transfer this information to that specific tool, and then this interfaces needs to be standard, because in the software development industry they already learned this on the hard way, right? And then if you think about now is how the information is exchanged between different services. It's just most of the time it's just JSON formatted, for example, right? And there's just let's say encapsulated in a specific request, and they just send it, and then you receive it. You get a response back saying you are successful. The other one gets the information they need, and it's done, right? So IFC in its form, it cannot play this role because it's too big. I know a lot of my colleagues, let's say from research, from academia, they invest a lot of time on, I don't know, expanding IFC, studying what's happening with the IFC and so forth. In my opinion, coming from the practice, it's just a waste of time. It's like the only reason you can export something to IFC if you want to just freeze in time different phases, the information, right? But then you can do it in the same way with the timestamp in a database in a schemaless format without following the IFC, and then you just retrieve it from there.
You know what is good? Because this will motivate people like you coming with better solution.
I mean, we see some efforts now, but I have none top of my head to give us a good example of practice. But we see that the industry, it's slowly moving to more, let's say, web-based solutions to support the design and engineering phase, when also supporting the operation and maintenance of the asset. So that's a good thing, because you can handle in an easier way this kind of interfaces. And then probably I might add something more to this IFC debate, and maybe people will start their own debate on this. But imagine you create those models, right? To some extent, you try to embed some kind of intelligence into those models.
Yes.
Right? And then we come back to the idea of parametrics, right? Parametric modeling. right? In the beginning, it was like the whole idea of the object-based parametric modeling. It's what Revit is doing. If you change the length or the thickness of the wall, it was actually going to update the stuff related to that wall, maybe distribution of the layers based on the thickness and many other things. We have this intelligence at the object level, and in some other cases we have it at the project level as well with more advanced cases, right? Imagine that once you exported that to IFC, you lost all that intelligence. It's like
PDF.
Yeah, it's like PDF, and then you send it to someone. It's like the way is like sharing a PDF with someone, and it's trying copying from the PDF to create a new Word document.
I heard these days in a meeting, someone said that PDF means permanently dead file.
Yeah, I think in some cases it's okay, but in some of the cases, yeah, it is the case. I mean, if you share that model with a specific purpose, I can give you different examples, right? So if you have an architectural model, which is like a 3D walls or maybe some information about materials to all the elements and windows glazing and whatever, if you share it with an energy expert who wants to run the simulation, he's just going to, let's say, format the entire model and reduce it to a set of surfaces and spaces and zones. And then have all that information just let's say linked to those surfaces. Everything was related to the wall, including the thickness, is linked to that surface as a parameter, right? And the same with the structural engineering. I mean, I'm a structural engineer by background, right? And we all know that simplified stick model we are doing when you do the structure analysis, and it doesn't help us much because everything related to the architectural model is basically, in our case, reduced to loads. And we see how the stick model performs and what's the best section we have to put there, right? And then what is the purpose of receiving from the architect the entire 3D model exported to IFC when it doesn't fulfill the needs, right? And you see, it's like, it starts from a really detailed model, which is usually the architects are doing, and then it comes down to the simplification, and the formula is discipline, is actually having in place to use the computers to support their effort in doing the structural analysis or so forth, right? And then it can be easily simplified.
How?
It's just through these interfaces. It's like, okay, I'm sending this model to the structural engineer. We already know what the structural engineer needs to run the structural analysis. You don't need to export everything to, so you just send it as a flow of data to the structural engineer. He put it together. And
But how concretely will you do that?
Well, you need to define these interfaces, and because again, you have this transformation from a data model to another data model. And then from one representation to another representation, right? Because if you want to use the computers to help us in our endeavors, right? We need to use specific formulas to how we see a 3D model or a wall, for example, from the perspective of a structural engineer, from the perspective of an architect. And we know that there is practice out there that they are working with that, right? And then you just define it's like, okay, if I'm going to send this model to a structural engineer, then this is the information a structural engineer needs. It's just only the structural model. I mean, if you look in Revit, there are efforts on clearly defining this analytics model. And then imagine that usually what's happening, that analytics model you define in Revit is actually the base for doing all the structural analysis in another tool from Autodesk, which is robot structural analysis. And then you send it back with you calculate specific sections for your elements or whatever, and you send it back to the same model from which you got the information, right? So it's just this, like defining the interfaces. It's like across disciplines, across tools. You need to have these interfaces which actually allow you, because we know what kind of data we send. You just send it, and the other person is going to use it.
Are you working right now on such an interface?
We had some projects on which we actually try to deal. I mean, I'm also talking from the experience as a software development in this way, because I took a model and then I had to transfer it to another tool, let's say from Revit to energy performance analysis. And then you just take them. I mean, if you look at in Dynamo, you might have different ways to export, let's say, to grab all the Revit file, to export it, to make this connection with different tools. So we can see nowadays, like Dynamo, at least for interfacing with Autodesk products, Dynamo BIM from Autodesk, right? So you have some packages which were written by some smart people out there, and then you can just take the Revit model and export it to different structural analysis software, to different energy performance analysis tools, right? So you just take the Revit model, and then through the pipeline created by these people, you just, without having the IFC as a middleman, and you just send it, and then you open it, it works perfectly, and then you do your job, you send it back, the results, based on the results, it's maybe going to perform some changes and so forth. So this is the interconnectivity we want. Otherwise, having a middleman is just going to break the entire workflow. And we start talking about the concurrent engineering in our field. And one of the underlying issues with the concurrent engineering is that we actually need to share data in real time with the other discipline. So why should I overload? So as an architect, if I perform changes on a 3D model, why should I overload the structural engineer with sending him the whole model, and then sometimes asking him is like, oh, look for changes. It's like find the differences, the game, right? When you can just send it the simplified version of your model, will update it on his side, and then he will quickly understand what was changed, right? And then and the idea of this collaboration, because each discipline, each stakeholder will create their own models. It's also very important to have these well-defined interfaces, like when you define what you share with the others. Because once you change something in your model, you need to clearly see what you have to share with the others, right? So that they can update the model. Because if you're talking about the collaborative engineering and design, then you need to do that. Also, you need to have the tools in place to support that. And from my perspective, it's just a matter of development, because all the knowledge is there. We've been doing this for years, right? Sharing, trying to share stuff, but it's a matter of the implementation, having it there. I mean, you can get a structural engineer, an architect, and an energy expert in a room and say, okay, this is the model I'm using. And then you already have like each one will say the models they are using. They all now say, okay, this is information coming from the architect usually. Then it needs to be transformed in this way. So then you have the interface, or you don't even need to transfer anything. It's like, and most of the times it's like the structural engineer, they will just create this thick model from scratch, based on some characteristics of the architecture, like where the walls are intersecting, where are the position of doors and windows, and maybe some shape features of the whole building. So you create this kind of, and then we know as a structural engineers, we know that this is kind of iterative process. And usually the architects, they like the iterative process because they keep changing the position of the doors, windows, and walls. And then if you share only that information, which is actually as a basis for the input for the structural engineer, he can quickly update his model, right? You don't even need to send the whole model, or the kind of, you just send the information they need.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's, and then it's just gonna, the whole information transfer probably is gonna be reduced to a set of 5-10 parameters, which the structural engineer can take it. But then you have the continuous flow between that, because if you change something, then you also want to have the structural engineer inform on your change, instead of having a specific meeting or a meeting especially set to communicate the changes from the architect. Or Just like from my experience, there are two ways the whole idea of the communication and collaboration can go on the project. In some cases can be beneficial, but you really need to define where are these interface points between different disciplines. And in some cases, it goes sideways, and the people they even forget what is the purpose of getting together, and they start talking about some random things in those meetings, and maybe some of them are not make any sense. I've seen meetings on which the architects start asking the structural engineer details about the structural analysis model. I say, how much of that stuff do you understand? In some cases, okay, it's important, but then when you start asking the details about what is this force at this base of the color, it's like, come
Now I
on.
need to get an architect on the podcast to defend everything you just said.
Yeah. I mean, I love working with the architects. I mean, one of the things I actually like at them is like this idea of iterating and changing stuff. I mean, change is good. I'm a big fan of changing stuff in a project, right? But don't change after the project was constructed. Do it until we hit the ground and know after we casted the concrete.
Yeah, that was interesting to hear. You live in Germany today. How would you describe the state of BIM in Germany generally compared to other countries in the world?
Well, I believe that they are working their way towards the adoption of BIM. But of course, like in any other in any other countries, there are hiccups. I think they try to standardize too much. They sometimes just overthink some things, and then if you try to standardize everything at the country level, instead of having a set of guidelines and policies, you try to implement a lot of standards and this kind of things, and it's a lot of hype around the IFC as well. Then you kind of force all the companies to adopt everything you standardize at the country level. It's like the way the design process goes, and it cannot be always the same because you always have probably different contractor, different engineer, different architects coming together. Everything is linked to this idea of the fragmentation, and you still need to bring all these people together, right? And then an architect, they have their own process. The structural engineer and the contractor, they have their own processes, right? And even if they are actually in Germany, then they still have their own internal ways of working. How do you actually start proposing a standard process which will force the other companies to work that way? It's a lot of emphasis put on the standardization.
Yeah, so you think this is the biggest struggle BIM and digitalization can go further?
It might, yeah,
quicker.
It might be. I can say it is my own
Yes,
opinion.
yes, you are allowed.
But yeah, it's like in any country, some companies are moving faster, some companies are moving slower, especially the asset owners. They usually move too slow and then usually need to have the contractor or the engineering company trying to support and trying to bring up to speed the clients. And then there is also a lot of struggle because everything in Germany is around what the law says, right? So if in the law it is required to print out all the drawings and to send them for the approval, then you have to do that. Otherwise, you cannot get around that. But we see things are actually changing in this direction. For example, some of the states in Germany, they are called Bundeslands. Some of the states actually start experimenting with
drawless projects,
digital submissions. Yeah, not drawing less project, but at least with digital submissions, such as you no longer have to print out 20 folders of your project or to print your project in 20 folders because you need to provide or to send out 3 exemplars. There's this struggle to actually create this momentum to change also the law, right? Because you want to get your project approved, right? And then if the law is actually required to you to send the physical printed drawings to send them to the approval organization, then you have to do that. But like I mentioned, some of the states are actually experimenting with these digital submissions instead of printing out. They have this possibility to make this digital submissions for approval. Of course, it's a lot of struggle in terms of security and how do we make sure that this actually comes from the right person with the digital signatures and so forth, right? But yeah, I think those are kind of challenges a lot of countries need to. And then it's a cultural thing, right? And then you imagine that you have to take everything what's related to the BIM theory and somehow to find a better fit for a specific culture.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's not easy to make the culture shift because we've building the same way for the last 2000 years.
Well, we see some changes in this direction. I mean, we've been struggling a lot. I mean, imagine in our industry, I think you're familiar with the concept of the industrialization, where a lot of accent was put on standardization. Then that moved away, and it comes the whole era of the user-based customization. I think about it like how the user can actually customize himself, the apartment, what is allowed to customize, and so forth. Right, and that's a bit kind of moving away from the whole idea of the standardization. And now with BIM and having also this kind of cultural thing that you can rearrange everything you want in your apartment, or you have a custom tailored solution for your needs in terms of a single family house or even in terms of a factory, right? So these are the things the people need to handle, for example.
The actual customer has been for so long completely ignored.
Well, yeah, in some cases, yeah, that's true. When you think about especially public projects, especially public projects, the infrastructure ones, right? We can say that. But what I wanted to say is like we see people are thinking, okay, we have some standardized solution, but these are easily adaptable to different needs of the users, right? I think about design for manufacturing. It's one of the trends nowadays where we actually consider all these, let's say, aspects of you have some standard manufacturing process.
Yes.
Right, and then that's also related to one of the issues is like a lot of waste actually comes from the construction sites. So one of the things is how do you actually design something which is in a big percentage manufactured off site, and then it's shipped to the site and quickly put together, for example.
Yeah.
And then having a kind of standards around how everything, the production of different parts of the building will happen and how all this will be put together, you need to account that for during the design and engineering phase, right? And then, of course, during the design, and then you need to consider also the all the user needs, and then to make sure that you fit your design on a specific production process. You can have one more or so forth, right? But you think about having as much as possible manufactured offsite. And then we see companies actually, the entire business model is built, it's around that. So yeah, there are companies there which are actually, they take the project, they have their standardized way of manufacturing things, and they take the input from the user. Usually, they work with the private investors. They do like parking, hospitals, schools, and so forth. And then they design what the user wants, but the solutions of how everything is put together is the ones they developed internally, so that they do also the engineering and the construction for the client. So you go to that company, it's called Goldbeck. So you go to that company You tell them what you want to create, and then they will take care of the design and the construction and the manufacturing for everything, right? So then this is actually another way to deliver our products, right? Because you cut out a lot of the decisions which are actually creating a lot of wasting waste, right? Thinking about who's going to be my suppliers. I can give you an example of one project where we have to create 3 design alternatives so that the final client will select a specific supplier for different materials or different components, right? How is the constructor going to construct everything, right? So once you have the design, usually what's happening once you have the contractor, that's going to say, oh, I'm not going to construct it this way. I might even thinking about changing the entire solution actually to tailor it on what I have available to work with, right? And so forth. We see, and then if you think about it, like doing the design, doing the manufacturing, and doing the construction, having one company is actually reducing the cost for the client, but also reducing the waste.
That's true.
Which are, and the time as well.
When less actors are involved, yeah, should be a little bit easier the workflow. Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, I think IKEA is trying something similar in Norway. I think they have a partnership with Skanska, if I'm not wrong. They try to sell these kind of buildings or houses pre-built.
Every country has their own approaches in this direction.
I don't know anybody. I did not read anything more about that, so I don't know how it works, if it's all right or not.
Yeah, so you see, it's like slowly the industry is changing. You see these innovative approaches popping up in different countries, and there are many more out there.
And that slowly, it's what's bothering me. That's why I start this podcast, my friend, because the slowly way it's bothering me. Because people need to know there are better ways they can work. There are better ways to do things.
Yeah.
And to learn, to hear about better cases, and after that to learn how they can implement that, can do the same. If a country can do it, of course, other country might do it as well, can do it as well, right? It might be some struggles, of course, like always. There are countries where the legislation goes easier, but it's easier when you have an example, when you have a model. And this is what I wish this platform to be, a showroom for good ways to build projects.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. I mean, sharing this or asking people to talk about what they are doing and share this with the entire world, it's really meaningful.
Now I would like to ask you one last question, and that is going to be, what can you recommend to someone who, let's say, they are interested about BIM? What would you recommend?
Well, I was a self-taught, and I became a manager based on what I managed to read from some academic papers, from some books, and even having some conversation with some people on some blog posts and online, and also having conversation with the colleagues around me, because to some extent some of them are involved in doing something in this, right? So I mean, there are some structured way of, I mean, if you cannot learn by yourself at home, you might consider, I don't know, doing or asking a consultant to do the training for you and to teach you everything. The way I will do it, I did it and I will do it again. I will just try to learn by myself. And of course, probably that the need of learning by myself. I mean, sometimes I was thinking it might be much more interesting to just go to follow some classes, some courses, right? But I couldn't afford them. So then because of that, I just started to learn by myself and to kind of explore what's happening out there in this direction. Another way is, like you see in UK, there are a lot of courses. And then I think the way the professional industry in UK it's organized, for example, it makes much more sense for them to follow a kind of professional setup, because they have this professional points, like continuous education points they get. So it's depending. I mean, of course, if you start learning a new tool, for example, to support you in your process, you might want to go and most of the software provider, they have the certifications. So that helps also a little bit. But when it comes to the whole process related to BIM, you need to get involved. You might, I mean, they need to get involved, right? Because with some other colleagues, maybe they are working on some projects where they're already doing this, they can learn. I learned a lot by doing it, right? And you, with your first project also comes a really steep learning curve. Especially when your goal is actually to become a BIM manager, and then as a BIM manager you have to deal with a lot of people from different ages. You may have your project manager not understanding anything of the technical aspects what's related to BIM. The only thing he wants to do is like to deliver the project in time. And then you have to explain to him is like, why do you need to train the people on the project to use specific software. And yeah, there are different challenges, and then you need to make sure that you train all the people with what's specific to that project. You convey the right message with every person joining the project.
Yeah, actually, what you just said about the project managers, I think this is one of the biggest problems, because even if there is a better understanding of BIM as a way to approach the building process at the lowest level, like for the engineers at the basic level, right? There is the leadership, it's way behind, and they are the decision makers. Project managers need to learn more about BIM and empower the people around you to use BIM more. You are the one that pull the strings and have it so slowly at the moment, and that could go much quicker if you learn first, if you learn more about BIM, and after that if you try to cultivate that.
But let me put it this way. For example, you have a project manager who successfully delivered his projects for his entire career, let's say 25, 30 years. And then it comes back to what I actually talking in the beginning of the podcast, saying which are the main key indicators, key performance indicators for a project manager: time and money, right? Time and cost, right? And then one of the things the project manager will always say, we do it like this in the past, we are going to do it again because it's the way it worked well, and then we all know how to do it. And then is actually what he's doing is actually shifting the responsibility from him, or from the responsibility of decision making from him to the others, which are his team, and they already work on a specific way, and they know how to do things, and it takes a little bit of load from the project manager, for example, in terms of making decisions. Because if you think about, it's like, okay, I have a new company, I have not a new company, I have a old company, maybe with 20, 30 people. We always used to do the work in the same way. But now we have this project with a new client, and he requires us to, let's say, work in a more digital way, because he actually requires the delivery, the handover to provide specific information which is needed.
Yeah.
Right? Then you need to train the people, and then where do you put all the costs related to the training the people? You put that on the project.
But at the same time, I think companies that live by this rule, that we did it this long in this way and we will do it, we'll keep doing it that way, they will become the dinosaur fossils soon. There are other companies that already are trying a different way, and they who will do this will have unmeasured gains from this in the future.
In the end, it comes down to what the client is asking. Because there were some cases where the client received a 3D model besides the drawing. So I said, I haven't asked for that. I'm hoping I'm not paying for it. I'm hoping I'm not paying additionally for it, right? And there are clients asking for it. But again, it comes back to the whole idea of the digital transformation. And I think most of the companies are already, I'm seeing changes in this direction, right? And I think is one of the things at least the top management, executive management are actually trying to do it these days, is actually to create a lot of awareness in the middle level management, which is the ones which are actually the project managers, right? So when you talk about the hierarchy on the company, you have the top management, middle, and then you have the people handling the tools and so forth, right? But then I think top management needs to build this awareness. And then, of course, if you want to win projects, you have to change the way you work, because you'll no longer be competitive on the market. Yeah, I mean, I think the executive managers are actually aware about the entire, and let's say the digital transformation, because they need to know what's coming and is going to disrupt their business, right? So when you think to a CEO or the boards of directors of a company, right? They all know what's coming. I mean, they need to know what's coming because it's their job and they get a lot of money for that, right? And if they are caught off guard, let's say, then it's gonna transform the company in a dinosaur. You mentioned. I think the top management, most of the companies, they know what's happening, and this is when we talk about the big companies. I think the small companies, which are not gonna change, probably will not survive. But we see
replaced.
kind of small companies are coming, which are innovative and even more innovative than the bigger, and they move faster and they have a more agile approach on working and this kind of things. But if you think, it's like a lot of let's say the experts in the civil engineering field, they are working for the big companies, right? And then that's where, if you have a company with 10,000, 20,000, 40,000 people across the world, imagine how many people are employed, right? And then, of course, in order to support that number of people, you need to make sure that you continuously get projects. And if you don't change, because when the market is changing, if you don't change, then you no longer afford to support so many people, and then they will just run away. More probably, they will just start their own startups, or they will join the competition who changed.
Yeah, I think a startup revolution is necessary, actually, and it's happening. I think it's happening already. What do you think about building smart? Are you following their work?
Well, I was doing it when I was a BIM manager, trying to understand or trying to be up to speed with what they are doing. But I have to admit that recently I put a lot of time on other priorities and not following building smart.
Yeah, I can understand that. I can mention that I've been following them recently, and they had this week and the last week they had many webinars. Because of COVID-19, they cannot have meetings and seminars live. They moved everything online and they were free webinars. I've been positive impressed about some of them. Lots of good examples. I learned many new things, and I think they are onto something, and they might be a very important factor in pulling everything further.
Well, it might be. I cannot say something because I don't know what they are doing. Right? Yeah,
you should read a little bit about.
It might help people to learn about some things, or at least to know what is coming. But it's still, I mean, it's like one of the changes the industry needs to know. I think one of the changes the industry need to adopt is having this. So currently what's happening is like most of the professionals working on the big company, they are hands-on working on developing something which is going to, let's say, be built, created, constructed on the real world, right? And one of the areas where most of the companies, even the big ones, are lacking is the research and development.
Yes, you just read my thoughts. I was thinking exactly the same.
So you need to invest a lot of time on researching, because if you think about how do you find out what kind of new services can you provide to your client based on the huge amount of data of 100 years of working or having the company in your domain, right? And you need to do the research. Otherwise, you will have to pay someone else to do the research for you. right? Do you want to do it in-house or do you want to do it outside? It might be the need to develop some tools which actually support the services. Are you going to do it in-house? Are you going to transform the companies in a software, the civil engineering companies in a software development companies because we automate everything? So there are a lot of questions. Are we going to just outsource the development to other companies, and then how we are going to use the expertise of our people, which are experts in the field on different domains and different areas, right? So how are we going to use that? So you see, it's like together with this digital transformation, it's coming a lot of questions which people need to answer.
Yeah.
I mean, we see more and more engineers, designers working on different disciplines. They learn how to code, right? They develop their own prototypes. If you want to implement them across the company, you need to make sure that these are to some extent professional because you are providing professional services. I can write a Python script and then to do something automatically, but it works well for the given conditions. I develop it. If I'm sending the same Python script to someone else, let's say in Australia, it might do some wrong to them. Right, so that's why the idea. Okay, we develop these small prototypes. We come to this idea of sharing what we are doing with the others, but we need to be aware that because we are providing in our domain, in civil engineering, we are providing professional services. We need to make sure that even these small tools, prototypes we are developing internally, are professional enough to be used on the project, because you need to rely on what that small script is doing. And then if somewhere it's breaking, is gonna break the entire design. You are gonna creating it, and in the end, lives are at stake, life of the people, right? So that's why I have to say is like I see a lot of this kind of, and I really like the idea of having the engineers doing programming and developing their own prototypes, solutions to support some automated tasks. But they need to also be aware about their applicability, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the key. It works because the guy who developed it is pretty smart. He thought about the project and he developed that prototype. But he developed it on that specific project.
Yeah, that's true.
Tailor it for that specific project. All right. It might not work on the other projects, and then that's why it's something. I mean, we see people start developing all these kind of solutions, and the companies are actually really happy to have some automation in place and to use it. But again, it comes the idea of being aware about the how much the solutions are generalizing.
Yeah, I read a lot lately about parametric design for bridges. That could be a case where you can actually reuse it quite easily across other projects as well. If you build a script for how to design a bridge, some specific parameters, you can just adjust those parameters later.
But then again, it's something people need to be aware, right?
Of course.
Because we see that all these scripts are now people have the possibility to just put them, hide them, right? So you have this really smart people developing all these parametric models, and now you can use them out of the box. In Revit, you have a button, you have the Dynamo player, whatever, right? You can run the script and you can have the design generated. Now, one thing people should know is that you cannot create a general solution with a simple Dynamo script, right? You can automate some simple tasks, right? But then when it comes to, for example, designing the bridges, right? And imagine that I am, let's say, from Europe. The basis of developing that script is actually, let's say, my standards. all the knowledge I have in the field of how to build bridges in Europe, right? I read the books on how to what to consider, what to keep in mind when you design something in as a bridge in Europe, and then it's no longer applicable for the US, right? Because they have different standards, they have different conditions, and then you can move just from country to country in Europe as well, right?
Yeah, that's actually something I experienced when trying to learn different softwares. If I found the material from guys from US, it was a little bit more difficult to follow and to apply it as a
It's like
Euro-based.
they follow a specific logic, right? So usually this kind of reasoning, it's kind of embedded deep in the engineer's mind, and then they after a while of practicing every day the same stuff, it's kind of hardwired in their brain, and then they follow it. And sometimes you have this smart guy developing this parametric model, and then you ask him to explain, and he gives you the impression that is actually built based on his intuition, but he's so smart, he worked so much on the field, he knows a lot, and then he no longer knows how to explain where he took something. Right? But yeah, so these are some of the points. I mean, I'm a big fan of parametric modeling, automated design, and generative design. As you can see, I have a T-shirt with Dynamo.
Yeah, I've been willing to ask you from the start, actually. Is that a Dynamo? Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm teaching Dynamo to my students at the university as well. Is one of the tools to support the parametric design. But this is one of the things we should be aware about, the limitation. In the end, a model is just a model, right? And like a smart guy said once, all the models are wrong, but some are useful, right? And then the point is like actually that model is useful for a given purpose you create.
Exactly. That was very well said. Yeah. Thank you very much for being with us and sharing your knowledge, Lucian. It was really
no
nice
problem.
to have you here.
It was my pleasure. A pleasure. Thank you for having me. And anytime you want to have another chat.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Again. Yeah, no problem. You're welcome.